So, picture this. I'm sitting behind my desk, and you are yet another couple planning to get married. All right? We are having a premarital counseling session. And that's something that I always do before performing marriages. And I ask this question. If I could give you one guideline that would prevent at least 3 days of heartache later on, would you want to know it? And you look at each other and shake your head. Yeah. And I say, but are you sure? And you look at each other and say, well, of course we're sure. And then I do one of these things, rub my forehead, and I go, but the problem is that once you know this, you can't unknow it. So if you go ahead later on and you kind of do what I'm going to tell you not to do, oh, you're going to be in bigger trouble yet. And so you look at each other with kind of a nervousness, take a big breath and say, well, we want to know it. And so I look you in the eyes and say, okay, here it is. In the heat of a moment, never say, you're just like your mother, or you're just like your father. Never, ever do that. For two reasons. First of all, those words are death words, and you understand what death words are, right? Those are the words that once you say them, you can never reel them back in. They will always be remembered. And most of the time, not forgiven. So if you're sitting next to a significant other, I want you to turn and look at them knowingly, because you know what some of those words are, right? Yeah, don't do the death words. But here's the other thing. It's not really true. There may be similarities, but they're not exactly like their mother or exactly like their father. Mark Twain, the famous humorist, said this. He said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Sure, there are some similarities, but they are not their mother. They are not their father. And if you say that, you're actually revealing insights from how your own family of origin worked. Oh. So don't do that. But isn't it interesting how what we learn from our parents is actually far more than we ever imagined. It's like we all carry around this family backpack, and we don't realize it's really there until we get in the heat of a battle or an argument. And it's like almost in magic, we reach into the backpack and pull out a rock and thwomp it at somebody else. It's just so interesting how those family patterns get passed on. And you think, I'm not going to be my mother, I'm not going to be my father. Then all of a sudden you find out, oh, I kind of am. And I need to pay attention to that. Well, before we move on, I hope it's felt like as we've been digging into the life of Adam and Eve and their family, we're discovering a side of them that we had just skated over before. And remember where we started this series, that it doesn't really start, from my mind, with necessarily people of faith, but also people without faith or outside of faith looking on, wanting to know, does the Bible have something that still speaks to modern people? And I've been saying all through these several weeks. Oh, it so does. But what I've asked you to do is to pay close attention, to read closely. Because what we see is that the book of Genesis has been very, very meticulously put together. And quite often, what isn't said can be just as important as what is said. Now, the last few weeks, hasn't it felt like several times we've been looking on and it's like watching slow motion train crashes? You're going, no, don't eat the fruit. Oh no, they did it. Adam, don't blame Eve. And we're watching these patterns continue, and it just makes your heart hurt a little bit. But wait, good news, chapter 4 starts, and it feels like a fresh start, right? It starts with love. Because as we all sing, all we need is love, right? Look at verses 1 and 2. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. So as we're listening to this, we look on at Moses, our storyteller, and I can picture him stroking his long beard. And it sounds so good, but there is something in his voice. It feels like there are just some storm clouds coming. We can't really put our finger on what it is, even in these verses, but things don't feel exactly right, because here's why. Isn't it curious that Adam, the guy at the center of it all, evidently he shows up for the conception, but then is silent as a fish? There's not a word of counsel that comes from Adam at all in this. And if we're reading it carefully, we have to be going, what's going on? Why is he so quiet? And it reminds me of this quote from an American poet, Longfellow. He said this: every heart has its secret sorrows, which the world knows not. And oftentimes we call a man cold when he is only sad. I wonder if that's a little bit of Adam's story. He looks back at what he has squandered. He's lost so much. Well, all we know for sure is that Eve is in charge of the naming ceremony, which is just, in that culture, is curious. Cain means a smith, like a blacksmith. It means a maker, somebody who builds things. So picture a confident, can-do kid. He's got no nonsense muscles. He makes things happen. But the younger brother, Abel, his name means breath, a vapor. Here in the morning, it burns off by noon. Well, that's going to be his story too, isn't it? Well, the two boys grow into men, and it's time for a festival. Think an end of the season festival where we celebrate God and we celebrate what God's given us, days for celebrating. And well, Cain is a little bit more of the grower in the family, and this is early, so there would be a lot of shared effort there. So Cain brings a couple of pails of wheat, a cabbage, and a dozen tomatoes or something like that. Produce that he can easily grow more of. And Abel is, well, he's more of the family herdsman. And he brings something that would have made the men in the audience suck air in through their teeth. Farmers only give a sheep for the most important of occasions. Because in their world, live sheep were sustaining. They give you milk, they give you wool for clothes, and more sheep. And once they're gone, well, they're just gone. But still, we aren't told the reason that Abel's offering the sheep gets God's thumbs up and Cain gets a thumbs down. We're not told that. We can guess, though. We guess that it's making the point that good worship always involves thoughtful sacrifice. Abel has that in spades. Cain doesn't. All we know for sure is that Mooney Abel, the kid brother, gets the honor. Cain gets the lump of shame. Cain's used to being the cool kid, the one who's going to get most of the inheritance. And I try to think what it must have been like for him, because he's the one who all throughout his life he's got the good looks, he's got the good hair, he drives a Porsche in high school, he's got it all. And all of a sudden he goes to ask a girl out on a date, the beautiful girl, and he finds out that she's chosen to go with the younger brother on a bicycle. And it's humiliating because all of the town would know that he has been somehow rejected. And he's not used to that in his life. He can't handle that humiliation. And this, with this new feeling, it doesn't really surprise us that things are going to turn violent. And they do. And deadly. But here's what I want you to see also, is that he doesn't just react in a fit of rage in the moment. That would be where I come from, second degree murder. It's something automatic, just flows. That's not what happens at all. What we see in the text is that there is a time gap in between the humiliation and what he does with it. How do we know? Look at verse 6. Why are you so angry? The Lord asked Cain. Why is your face so downcast? You will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door. And the word picture is like a mountain lion is crouching at the door of your home. And he's eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. Now, we're all a group of people, right, listening to the storyteller. And what this begins to suggest is that this God who oversees our world, he doesn't control our lives, but he gives us a terrible gift of freedom. And we can choose to cooperate with him, or we can turn to go our own way. And sin is crouching like a mountain lion at our door, and we have the responsibility. We're not automatons. We've got the responsibility to fight it or to side with holiness and with God. So let's review. Cain's crime is premeditated. Even though God gives him the warning, don't do it, Cain goes ahead. And does the unthinkable. Remember what Mark Twain said? History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And what we see is that the example of mom and dad, well, it's frightfully similar to what happens with Cain and Abel. Let me tick down some of these just to give you a sense of things. Both stories begin in a place of either well-being or love. Both stories go off the rails when people start coveting. And keep in mind that it is coveting that this chapter in Genesis really wants to point out. And one of the 10 Commandments, it's about coveting. They get anxious about what they don't have and think they must grasp it in order to be happy. That's what coveting is. And so they take shortcuts. Entitlement and ambition takes over their lives, just like it still takes over our lives. And with both of these, God goes in a search. Remember Adam and Eve? Adam and Eve, where are you? Cain, where's your brother? What's he say? Am I my brother's keeper? You know the story. In both situations, without repentance, there are consequences. And in both stories, God gives a curse. But remember, in the first one, only the snake gets the curse. This time, a curse is going to fall on Cain as well. So he's not just replicating what happened with his mom and dad. It gets worse. And in both occasions, there is an expulsion. With Adam and Eve, they had to leave the protected garden, that paradise. Remember, we talked about what that was. And they had to move out to land that you could still tend, but it wasn't what it had been. Now in this one, Cain is going to have to become a migrant and move out from arable land to hostile territory. All of this sounds really similar, but it just rhymes. Adam and Eve hid. Cain spirals down into even more belligerence. If you look at his story, there isn't any softness to it at all. There's a viciousness to it. Adam and Eve respond to God's inquiry with submission. Cain, he's dismissive. Like I said, in chapter 3, the curse is on the serpent in the land. In chapter 4, Cain is the one cursed. So Phil, what's the point? What are we supposed to see in this story? Well, let me give you a couple. Here's number one. Your children will build on your faith legacy. You aren't responsible for their choices. We see that Cain is going to have his own choices to make. But what you are responsible for is the authenticity and the richness of faith that they see in you. Whether they cling to your faith or depart from it, you have a responsibility before God not to make them do or accept everything that you believe, while you might wish that they would. Your responsibility is authenticity and the richness of your own faith. And kind of in these three areas. In what you teach, whether actively or passively, how they see you handle stress, conflicts, disappointment, and hospitality. What? Phil, what? Why hospitality? Here's something we're finding out from research among Christian homes. What is appearing to be the most significant indicator of whether children hold on to faith is something you would have never have guessed. It's hospitality. Have your children seen you live out community inside your own home? Didn't see that one coming, did you? Here's the third thing that your children will want to be looking for. What is it that mom and dad value most? Where do they see your devotion? Where do they see your greatest loyalty? Is the faith that they see just an add-on? Just one more thing in your busy life? Or do they see your faith and relationship with God at the very center of your life? And let me say again, you can't force your faith on your children. But you can be who you need to be in the middle of it, trusting that they will return and remember and be trained by that. Here's number 2. Each of us must do our own battle against a fear-based covetousness. Each of us must do our own battle against a fear-based covetousness. Covetousness is one of those words that we don't really use a lot, but it is at the very center of so much of our lives. And it breaks down most cases into 2 seasons. Here's the first one. Next slide. It's in our quest for significance, during our climb for ambition, position, wealth, and stuff. We want the promotion, we want the larger house, we want the right kind of car, because deep down we hope that that new car, that new place where we live, that vacation, the toys that I have, we hope that those things are going to reflect upon us and indicate that we are a successful, accomplished person. And deep inside, we are afraid that we aren't. And so, afraid that we're not getting those things, we start coveting, we start wanting what somebody else has, because we see that if you have the right insignia on the front of your car, that says a lot about who you are. So much of our acquisitiveness comes out of a fear that we're not measuring up, or we don't have the markers of success, accomplishment, or wealth. So significance, the season of significance is the first one. Here's the second. And it usually comes a little bit later on. It's a hunger for security, honor, influence, safety, and love. So a couple weeks ago, I talked about when people moving into their 40s and their 50s, they kind of move from gathering up all of the stuff to moving into a sense of getting honor from other people, having influence, being safe, and having enough retirement accounts. And inside, we start coveting. We're afraid that we're not going to have the love that we really want most, and so then the 47-year-old woman leaves her marriage because she hopes that she will find the love that will satisfy her heart in a new sort of relationship. There's quite often a fear-based covetousness going on. The guy who has to have all the toys and wants to be the center of every conversation. There is a fear-based covetousness that I don't have enough respect from other people. So if I can keep talking, or if I can be funny enough, or get this and that, then in some way I will have the security that I need in life. The covetousness in Genesis 3 and 4 is the same covetousness. It works in the same way in 2024. And third, the relationship God has in mind with us is one of decisional loyalty. Let me say that again. The relationship that God has in mind with us is one of decisional loyalty. Now, I'm going to set aside the word for worship right now and substitute decisional loyalty for that. And I know that's a little confusing, but the word worship is so freighted with style and church experience that I think the word loyalty conveys a much clearer picture of what real worship is. What God was looking for in Cain is a decision to be loyal to God and to turn away from the inclination of revenge or punishment. And I think this is interesting even in how God treats Cain. God treats Cain with a decisional loyalty, because even after Cain takes the path that he does, and God carries out a curse, here is Cain and his family, and Cain is literally, the text says, he's crying. Why? Because he is going to be so vulnerable and so at risk. And if you've ever been an immigrant, you know what he's talking about there, because an immigrant lives with that sort of thing. Cain is absolutely shattered that he will be living that kind of life on the run. That God does this loyal thing even in the midst of it. He gives him a mark, a sort of tattoo, and we don't know what it was, but here's how it functioned. It was to be like a warning light, a flashing light saying, don't mess with this guy. Even though he has turned his back on me, I am going to be loyal to him. And it is a picture of grace again, even in the 4th chapter of the book of Genesis. Amazing. Grace that always sees me, no matter where I go, whether I'm in the Garden of Eden, whether I'm in the arable steppes, or whether I'm in the middle of nowhere. This God is paying attention to me. A few years ago, we were in Philadelphia, and we were at a party. And at this party, there were all of these kind of rich, hoity-toity people. And I met one fellow, and he was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, a pretty highbrow university. And he said, oh, what is it that you do? And that's something that we goofy Americans always do. First question is, what is it that you do? And I hate it when I get that question, because when I have to tell them that I'm a minister, people don't know what to do with that. It's like, excuse me, I need to go refresh my drink. And so they leave the conversation. Now, something different is happening. People either run or they're intrigued. They want to talk a little bit more about it, because I guess they feel like to be a Christian pastor is something outside their experience. And so we got started talking. And about 15 minutes into the conversation, instead of running, it was marvelous. He was asking me all about what it is that I think and believed and how I got there. And at one point he said, you know, I'm a Jew, and I so wish that I had grace in my faith. Because he said, when I look at Christianity, to me it looks like it's all about grace. And I wish I had that. And I said, well, actually, you do. And we talked about Genesis 4 and Cain and Abel and God's loyalty to him. God chooses to be loyal to him. And I think this is such a marvelous picture for us, that in our own walk with God, there are going to be confusing times that we don't really understand. God, where are you in the midst of it? But in the midst of even my confusion, I want to follow God to say, I don't know how all of this fits together, but I choose to be loyal to you. Like Jesus said, not my will, but thine be done. And so this story connects with all of us. And I think what sums it all up is this great little quote from C.S. Lewis. There are only two kinds of people in the end: those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done. I'm sorry, I typed that wrong. Will you give me a reprieve and let me reread that? There are only two kinds of people in the world: those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, in the end, your will be done. I want the team to come on up, and I want to bring what I wanted to share to a close here. And I think what matters most to me is to come down to those three ideas. Is to say, first of all, how is the legacy of your faith that you're passing on, how is that looking these days? What are, if you have grown children or teenage children, what are your children or those you influence seeing in your faith? Are they seeing an authenticity? Are they seeing a warm heart for God? Second, are you finding any struggles? Are you finding yourself in any fearful coveting? A low-grade dissatisfaction with what you've got, and you're seeing what other people have? Is coveting a problem that maybe you haven't named? And third, is it time to renew your decisional loyalty? That you may be confused, you may not know what your future looks like, but you say, not my will, but thine be done. Will you pray with me? Father, this story that we thought we knew, this story that hundreds of generations of people sat around the campfire and telling and retelling, it is still so perfectly applicable to where we live in an age of technology and space travel. These are still issues that bedevil us. And I pray for us that we would be men and women who would have the ability to look inside and to reflect upon the health of our souls with you. May your Spirit teach us where we need to be taught. May your Spirit heal us where we are grieving. May your Spirit give us vision for the road ahead. In Jesus' name, amen.